Everyone has a story. At Coca-Cola, we want.
All working fine. And the streaming also. Doesn't want to take sound. Oh, okay. Yeah. So ideally I should sit where I can watch this. Just turn that around. Just so I can look at my audience. Look at everybody. That's going to be alright, eh? And the mouse is for you, not for me. Let's move this a little bit forward. How's that look to you? Going to be able to catch it?
Yep.
Okay. And it's fine for me to... Sure. No, that's great. Where my camera guy's gone? Give me a sec.
It's got the chocolate.
Sometimes they do.
Yeah, can you imagine?
No, we've been trying to we did a rehearsal yesterday, but I don't know apparently some problem with the sound.
Oh, okay.
So it's no use live streaming it if
There's a problem with the sound, yeah.
there's a problem with the sound. Right. Should we ready to go? Okay, brilliant.
Okay. Before we start, I just want to give you some background to why the whole HKE department is sitting in the Journ department. Obviously, this is our research seminar, and at the beginning of the year, I think I got Harry to commit to presenting to us because I'd seen him give a keynote address at the International Society for Behavioral Nutrition and Physical Activity, which was held in Cape Town. And he was the only non-physical activity researcher there, and he brought a very different slant to health behavior research in terms of media use. And it was very well received. And since then, I think people are desperate to hear what he has to say further because he's been researching it along the line. At the same time, I am on the committee of the International Society of Physical Activity and Health, and my portfolio is specifically education. And there's about 5 of us. We in Brazil, India, Australia, the UK, and we organise the educational slant of the International Society, and so we arrange webinars throughout the year as one of the educational components. So I thought it would be nice to use this as a webinar, and it's going to, we were going to live stream it, but we had a practice run yesterday and there was a problem with the sound. So it's being recorded as a YouTube video, and then it's going to be uploaded to the ISPA website, and it's been advertised across the world. And it was also a problem with time zones. So we were trying to coordinate Brazil, Australia, England, the States and South Africa. That just didn't work. So yeah, it's going to be a first time, but I also want to encourage you, can you go to the audience for questions?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And the live streaming sound is working now, so we
Okay,
are live
that's
streaming
great.
to the world as we speak. So are you.
My goodness, okay. So we are live streaming. I want to encourage you to ask questions, because obviously the people that are watching overseas can't ask questions. If it was live streamed, I would have had my computer and emails would have come through. So you guys have to ask questions, otherwise the people on the other side are going to have some gaps. So to welcome, firstly switch off your cell phones, and secondly just sign the register that's going around. Professor Harry Dagmore is no stranger to you at Rhodes University. I'm sure most of you know him. He is the director of the Centre for Health Journalism, and we've worked with him previously in the Department of HKE. As I said, he gave the keynote address at the Eastern Park Conference. It was well received. And he's been looking at research into how media use can influence health behaviors. And today he's going to focus specifically on how we can take lessons from Coca-Cola and Red Bull and maybe use their strategies to increase levels of maybe physical activity and healthy behavior choices. So it gives me great honor to welcome Harry and to thank you again for presenting on behalf of ESPA.
Thanks, Kenneth. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Use the mic, or is the sound? Do I need to use the mic? Or is the sound fine? Oh, great. Good. We've got a boom mic. I'm going to sit. I don't normally sit. It's just because of the configuration on the screens and having to see the slides. This technology actually allows us to embed the slides in the movies, but we're not doing that now. It's a slightly more complicated procedure. So I'm going to go quite quickly because I think Candice is quite right that we want to throw this open to questions. And looking around the room today, I can see people who know social media, who are on social media, who are probably on Facebook already a dozen times today, because usually one's done that if one's under the age of 34, by 9 a.m. in the morning. So some of us look at our social media more than 100 times a day. It's quite an extraordinary new tool and new set of affordances. So we are going to look very briefly at how social media marketing has become a new additional component of, especially in this particular case, Coke and Red Bull, but we're looking at sugary sweetened and sugar sweetened beverages, SSBs in general. Our bigger research project is looking at both that and fast foods in South Africa and in Africa more significantly. So it's going to be coming at you quite thick and fast because I've got a lot of slides, but I think we're going to have fun. I'm going to give you a sense of what our research questions are, as well as some of the research we've done. A lot of what we've done so far has been of the look, see, describe variety, but we have developed, and I'll share them with you, some analytical platforms and some theory. For us, we're having to draw not only from reception studies and audience studies and media effects theory, which is very much part of what this Jones School is about in terms of media studies and cultural studies, but we're also drawing from marketing theory, which we're a lot less familiar with, and going to seminars on marketing and trying to understand this nexus of media, publicity, public relations, journalism, and real effects in the real world on people's consumption choices. So I was going to do a lot more on marketing and the choice set and choice set theory. We can talk a little bit about that if you want to know more about in question time. Essentially, all one needs to know about that for our purposes here is that large brands spend a great deal of time trying to get you into what they call their consideration set. And they want you to be what comes to mind should you feel thirsty. Or, more importantly, should you feel in a particular mood that they are trying to associate their brands with. And in most things, whether it's cars or washing machines or washing powders or fast food, or soft drinks, your choice set is going to be limited usually to 3 or 4. So they work very, very hard to make sure that they are one of the things you think of when you go into a party, attending a sports match, relaxing to watch the rugby or the cricket or the netball or the softball or whatever. So they try and associate when you have that thought, because obviously you're not having purchase decisions all the time. So I'm not going to say anything more about it. We're going to just look very, very briefly at some of the stuff that we've been observing and some of the analysis. So this all comes in the context of this really substantial public health driven decline in big soda in their so-called home markets. So this has been really interesting and very, very substantial. It's making a lot of waves over the last 5 or 10 years. If you look at some of these numbers, it's quite extraordinary. I must just put this onto presentation mode if I can. Sorry, it's not in presentation mode. Should have been. There we go. So it's quite extraordinary. You can see just in the 2015, there's some big brands there that are dropping 5, 6, 7% a year. And if you look at this slide, you'll see that US per capita consumption peaked way back in 1999, when they were going along at basically only 53 gallons per person per year. Now a gallon, anyone knows what a gallon is in liters? 3.8 liters. So roughly Americans were consuming approximately 200 liters of sugary sweetened beverages per year per person in 1990. It's quite a lot, you know. It's like about 750 a day on average. Now, of course, you know, averages. A lot of people consume a great deal more than that. But that has been coming down, and this has been a huge crisis for the soft drink manufacturers in the mature European markets, in the mature North American markets. So what have they done? They have focused very specifically on, guess where? On the developing world, and on Africa, and on South America and Southeast Asia, and on us, and particularly on us. And we are a really privileged focus of all the big guys. They see us as unbounded potential. And what you've seen is a great deal of coverage, a lot of good journalism, a lot of interesting business journalism, just precisely about how people are just seeing that's where they make up their profits. And so it has proved to be true. Every few percentage that they lose each year, they're making up in the developing world. In fact, more than making up. It's quite extraordinary just how much of their shift from their profits are now starting to come from these huge Coke vans driving across iconic African landmarks. And you can see just some of those numbers there, the soft drinks growth prospects over the last 5 years, and where they see specifically, you'll all have the access to the slide set afterwards in a PDF form, and you can see very specifically when they're talking about over time in terms of the increase in the rate of profit. That's specifically for Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. We're also seeing a great deal of consolidation in particularly Coke's operations. Just 2 years ago, they consolidated all of their operations into this new company, Coca-Cola Beverages Africa. It is a very, very big employer. Coke employs over 60,000 people on the continent. It's a big company. And I suppose that's a good time to say, one's talking about the health implications of their products. One's not making judgments necessarily about them as an ethical employer. One's not necessarily making judgments about their stance in the world. They try and do a lot of good in the world. There's the Coke Foundation. But they have the largest marketing budget in the world, as we'll touch on later. Literally the largest marketing budget in the world, more than $4.5 billion US. And they are targeting Africa and the developing world with a very specific product, and it's a product that's full of sugar. And that's really what we're discussing today. It's about the physical inactivity, the sedentary lifestyles, urbanization, and this rapid increase in the consumption of sugary, sweetened beverages and fast foods in the developing world, which has led to a very particular crisis that we'll come to in a moment. So you can just see that they're pretty impressive. They're selling a great deal. They measure it in hectoliters, which is a very big number. And a very great deal, 70% of that operation, you saw that slide just now, but 70% of that big operation that's in 13 different countries is sold in South Africa. So we are big compared, pretty much, you add everyone else up and we're still more than that. But that's expanding. It's expanding very, very rapidly. They're predicting a 7% growth in their sales in the next 5 years, every year, and they're falling by about that amount each year. And you've got this wonderful quotation from the head of Coke in South Africa, just saying how focused like lasers they are on the township market. They have doubled the number of what they call township outlets, spazas particularly, doubled them in the last 5 years. So they're still, per capita, we have far fewer outlets per person than, say, Mexico, which is one of their really big expanding markets where they've really gone hard at this. So they see a lot of growth in what they call the bottom end of the market, and you can see their numbers there. You can look at those slides. I mean, for South Africa to already be just already up there. Mexico is by far the worst, as you probably know. Mexicans are drinking about between 2 and 3 cans per day per person, per capita. The global average is much lower, and the African average is only about 20. South Africa's average is over 200 cans per year per person. So we are, that's why we get onto these global charts. This is a chart. This chart goes right down to 140 countries, and there South Africa is in the top 10. And it may explain some of our money. Some of our particular health issues. I'll come to our digital divides and some of our social divides in a moment as well, but we can also see, a little bit surprisingly, how for the last 5 years, Red Bull, Coke South Africa has been one of Red Bull's top 5 growth markets, growing at this incredible rate of 10% some years, 14% other years, off a relatively small base, but really, really pushing it. You can see also doing very well in South America, some semi-developing countries like Poland. I don't know if they'd like to be called a developing country, but this is a remarkable company. It's come from nowhere in the last 30 years to become one of the great major players. And the reason we focus in so hard on them, not just because of the ingredients of their main products, which are astonishing to analyze and look what's in a Red Bull and what it does to the human physiology. We'll do that a little bit just now, but also because they are the social media pioneers, not just in the soft drinks, sugar-sweetened beverages category, but for marketers as a whole. If you go to Harvard Business School and you study marketing, you will look at Red Bull. They are that good on the social media side. And so quite a remarkable company. Just a quick thing to add, we are talking about a transition to greater levels of social media marketing. Red Bull are far down the line. Coke are very sophisticated, as I'll show you in a few minutes. But this is an overlay on top of traditional marketing. The billboards aren't stopping. The wonderful TV ads that they make. Red Bull gives you wings that everybody likes and has their personal favorite. You can go and choose your favorite Red Bull Give You Wings animated cartoons, of which there are dozens and dozens, and share them with your friends on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and Pinterest and Snapchat. They're all there and they're all wonderful. They're one of the most genius marketing campaigns of all time, Red Bull Gives You Wings. But it's an overlay, and it works with a variety of other strategies, including what we all call above the line, which is TV, radio, print, billboards, as well as public relations and marketing. And they're focusing in South Africa, they get these numbers because they're focusing very much on people around the room. They're looking at university campuses, they're looking at high schools. And we'll talk about why our specific focus of our research project, which we started at roughly the beginning of last year, so we're about halfway through a 4-year process. All the papers are coming next year. There are no papers yet. This is the first master draft of the fast food of the sugary drink paper, and then there's the fast food. And in fast foods, just by the way, we're looking at Kentucky, and we're looking at McDonald's. Kentucky Fried Chicken is the largest fast food outlet in South Africa, pushing on for 1,000 branches, growing at a very, very rapid clip. At one stage, they were growing at 1 a week. I think that slowed a little bit, but there were no Kentucky Fried Chicken outlets in South Africa in the mid-70s. And I think in 1994, we were up to only about 150. So since democracy, this has really expanded. And fast foods and sugary sweetened beverages go wonderfully together because they are packaged together in bundled packages. And they're aimed at adolescents and children. The classic quintessential McDonald's Happy Meal, which you can now have with a healthy alternative. You don't have to have the Coke, Sprite, or Fanta. You can also have it with the fruit juice. And if you look at the sugar content of fruit juice. Another story, we'll come to that in a moment. And you can see from the latest figures, and this is from this very wonderful organization you all know about, Gila, who are running the sugary drinks, first public campaign that we've seen in South Africa. Don't drink yourself sick, that's been run at the moment. It's an alliance of public health campaigners, and basically 70% of South African women are overweight and obese, and we have the highest obesity rates in sub-Saharan Africa. And you can look at some of those numbers just in terms of, if you don't know this Lancet series on chronic diseases in South Africa, really worth looking at. This is from the third of the series. And looking in terms of South African women, just below Mexico. So Mexico is the first country, we'll talk about that later if you want to in question time, to introduce successfully a tax on sugary sweetened beverages. We're trying to do that in South Africa. It's a big part of another bit of work that we're doing and looking at, because the public relations journalism war on that has been just extraordinary. These guys are throwing the kitchen sink at opposing these taxes in every country in the world. And they are doing it with the same degree of sophistication and resources as the cigarette companies did in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. They're hiring scientists, they're hiring the best PR companies. Bell Pottinger's no more, but they were working with Bell Pottinger, and 18 of Bell Pottinger's closest cousins. The big guys are all making a lot of money, because if they can just delay, they won't. Every country in the world, like with cigarettes, will eventually have substantial restrictions, I believe, on sugary sweetened beverages. But if they can delay that by 5 years, or 10 years, or 15 years, they will. In the meanwhile, we are having what's the start of a fairly chronic and deep-set obesity crisis that is leading particularly our diabetes rates in South Africa to skyrocket. Already a prevalence of about 7% of South Africans with diabetes. And the cost of diabetes and the cost of non-communicable diseases is going to outstrip communicable diseases very soon. And we've got a dual epidemic, as you know, in South Africa. We've got the communicables with TB and HIV, and now we're overlaying it with the continent's certainly largest diabetes outbreak. Those two together have got the potential to collapse our health system. So how does it work? How do these guys do it? What are they kind of focusing on? Well, there's a new game happening in town, as we all know. And it's these three intersecting revolutions. And it starts off with just how quickly, in the last 4 or 5 years, you've seen IT uptake and people getting online. It's very important to stress that we still have an enormous digital divide, just as we have an enormous social divide. So South Africa is unambiguously the most unequal country in the world in terms of income inequality. Us in Namibia, we have no peers and no rivals on the Gini coefficient. That means the gap between rich and poor is larger in South Africa and Namibia than any other country in the world. It's quite an extraordinary place to be, and I've got lots of slides on that I won't show you. And it's also in terms of asset inequality. It gets reflected in the fact that even though we are number one in IT uptake, as of 2017, only half of South Africans are online. So we had a seminar the other day with 13 top teachers from schools here in Grahamstown, and the person that was conducting the seminar, Rod Amner from our department, was very surprised when he said, I'll email the stuff to the teachers. Only 3 of the 13 of them had email addresses. So they're teachers working in schools, even some good schools, and not having email addresses. So we mustn't overstate how rapidly the social media, data prices are still high, cell phones and smartphones are still high, but it is starting to change. And certainly in terms of the aspiring and aspirant middle class of Africa and South Africa, people are getting smartphones in unprecedented numbers. You can just see there, in the last 7 years, South Africa, we're now up to about half of the population, roughly, having a smartphone. It's a smartphone that's capable of doing social media. And social media, in terms of the theorizing we're doing, we're trying to theorize this as a unit, social media on smartphones. We're using it, we've developed that acronym, and we're looking at a bunch of affordances and capacities and capabilities that I'll talk about in a moment. But you can see South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Tanzania, it's starting to shift. You're starting to see that hockey shape coming up, and already slightly different figures showing that smartphones in South Africa, approximately 28, 29 million people having those. Social media overlaid on smartphones is a very particular and powerful combination. And we'll see how it intersects with behavioral psychology, behavioral economics, marketing, and all comes together in this enormously interesting device. Some people are live tweeting this session. Other people could be Instagramming it. I don't see anyone and the rest of you are concentrating. Itana's job is to live tweet it, so ignore the person. She's not actually texting her friends and checking her Facebook feed. Social media is a collection of online platforms and tools that people essentially use to share content, and that's why I've underlined it. It's about sharing, and it's about also sharing experience, perspective, facilitating conversations and interactions. And it's about the best kind of composite definition. There are a lot, and there are a lot by much bigger luminaries in our field of media studies in my particular field, which is journalism studies, but I still find that a very, very useful understanding of what the social media is in terms of a descriptive content. And they're platforms mostly for sharing user-generated content. So we are creating, and that's the genius of social media, much of the social media. It's a wonderful article. That's the URL is available here, called a recent review. It just came out last week on Facebook on book review, and it's called "You Are the Product," and it is about both how the Russians hacked the American election via Facebook and Twitter, and it's also about the social media campaigns. You share user-generated content. There's strong collaborative and collective elements. It produces a whole variety of interaction and interaction patterns, which algorithmic artificial intelligence can mine to consistently and in real time refine the campaigns. So as I'll share with you just now, the mechanisms and the affordances of social media on smartphone, this paper argues, creates a particular confluence of interactivity, engagement, intimacy, and this veneer of authenticity. And this is a lethal combination. This is really, if you want to persuade somebody to change something, like vote for Trump, this is the place that you're going to do it, even if the people didn't really want to do it. If you want to persuade young South Africans to take up Red Bull at a clip that's increasing by 10-12% a year, this is absolutely the mechanism to do it, especially when it's overlaid, as I said, with traditional media. User-generated content transforms youth from relatively passive receivers to active participants in marketing campaigns that are aimed at them. So you get to participate in marketing to yourself, to share in with your friends. And we know that marketing is very often about constructing a narrative, and that's exactly what all good marketing does. It creates a story. It tells you a story. Social media marketing says, where are you in the story? Tell us. Where do you want to be in the story? It's about, as this very useful article says, about creating these archetypal narratives that consumers can insert themselves into. And that's fascinating, because you can't insert yourself into a TV ad. You can see yourself, you can aspire to those wonderful, happy, shiny faces, but on social media you can both watch that and insert yourself into the narrative. And we'll see how they do that. All this comes about, as I said, with these three intersecting revolutions of the internet, of the absolute explosion of capacity on smartphones, and the proliferation of social media. So in my JMS3 class, which we're currently doing a course, most people are on about 6 different social medias. There's WhatsApp, there's Messenger, there's Facebook, there's Instagram, there's Pinterest, and most people use 2 or 3, but most people are on 6. In more developed countries, people are often on 7 and 8. You've got a lot of choices. YouTube is the #1 way that South African young people are listening to music. So YouTube's become a social media of itself. Instagram is just going ballistic. You know, you talk to anybody who's got kids under the age of 18, Instagram is just so addictive and so brilliant, as are Red Bull and Coke's campaigns on Instagram. So we're talking here, as the New York Times put it in that article, that very first slide, about countering an existential threat. And what is the existential threat? It says that historically beverage preferences are set in adolescence. And what's happening in most of the developed world is, as this guy says, kids are growing up with all these other options. There are even parents who say, I want my kids to drink fruit juice or water. I mean, can you believe it? But there are parents that do that. And if kids grow up with without carbonated soft drinks, the likelihood of them growing up when they're 35, suddenly starting drinking them, is very low. So they are seeing this, like the cigarette companies done, in existential terms. You saw those figures. They really are falling fast. And that's because of the stuff that a lot of us do, public health campaigns, letting people know. The big thing, the big secret about sugar tax campaigns is not that whether you get the tax. It's the fight that you have to try and get the tax, because then you have to present evidence to say why you want the tax, and people pay attention to that evidence. So there's about a dozen US cities where they've tried to introduce the tax, most famously New York. They've failed, but in presenting the case and going on TV and arguing with the lobbyists and the PR people, they've been able to make the case, and it's actually been as effective almost as the tax. And even in South Africa, we've all suddenly seen more media about why there should be a tax. Oh, 12 spoons of sugar in every Coke. Oh, 14 spoons of sugar in every Red Bull. Diabetes. What happens with diabetes? Amputation. You know, it just gets the word out. So it's existential. And so Coke, to address this, I'm just going to show this to you here, has really taken a whole new approach, and I'm going to just share this with you. It's very short. It is worth sharing. I hope it plays.
Everyone has a story. At Coca-Cola, we'd like to think we're part of those stories from time to time. In the late 1980s, we began a journey to tell ours. Stories of everyday life, stories of overcoming the odds, of triumph, of adversity.
Okay, so we've got to take this out. Sorry about that. Just have to go to the video. Yeah. I was just more concerned with the sound. Yeah. There we go. We get the sound up a little bit. There we go. Yeah. Okay. On our way. Sorry about that, guys. Recue.
Everyone has a story. At Coca-Cola, we'd like to think we're part of those stories from time to time. In the late 1980s, we began a journey to tell ours. Stories of everyday life, stories of overcoming the odds, of triumph, of adversity, of happiness. Now we're rebooting the conversation in the digital age. This is Journey, the Coca-Cola Company's digital storytelling platform. A once static corporate website turned global media and content hub. It's where we engage with our consumers in real time, where we pull back the curtains to unbottle our stories and share a snapshot into yours. Coca-Cola Journey gives us a voice to celebrate where we've been and where we're going. It's a unique place where we strive to inform, inspire, and provoke through a balance of branded content and unbranded stories that reflect our passion points. Journey's content is fueled by reader insights and powered through social media. We're expanding our conversation, creating local Journey sites in markets around the world. Through our storytelling and visuals, we surprise and delight our audience and provide moments of happiness each and every day. This is our Coca-Cola Journey, refreshing the world one story at a time. Join us at #CokeJourney.
So it's quite extraordinary how excited they are about it and how open they are about it, because, you know, Coca-Cola really do believe, and they're one of the largest employers in the world, that they are on a mission from God to do good in the world. And they want to sell more Cokes. They want to refresh the world. You heard all the consumer and corporate speak there about how they're wanting to share their journey and they're wanting to provoke and inspire. But the main reason I showed that is about how they seek to insert you in the story in a variety of ways through their ads. And I don't know if you saw that 1 millisecond, I wish I had the exact, of the Indian wedding, where she had the 2-liter Coke up to her mouth. It's just extraordinary, some of the campaigns that are being run. Let me go back to the slides. But the commitment to social media is unambiguous. They are starting to divert increasingly large sums. I mean, some of the figures that we've come across is that about 10 to 15% of their marketing per year is getting shifted online. So you are increasingly seeing more and more of this work. Why? Because online works so incredibly well. And let's look at why that is. It's because particularly it enables a kind of intimacy. There's nothing more intimate than your cell phone. 97% of people, let's say 3% of people don't have their phones, the people who have phones, within 2 meters of their body 24 hours a day. Think about it, they're on our bodies, 24 hours a day. So even when you're sleeping, they're within 2 meters. They should be further, but they're not. The vast majority of people look at their phones when they wake up in the morning. Some people here do that, yeah? And what do we mostly look at? Social media. So it's a very powerful, very intimate mechanism, and that intimacy is something that really expands the ability of this to change your habits. And sorry about this overblowing the font. Engagement and participation. And then this whole notion of authenticity. We'll look at that at the moment. So Coca-Cola united all its brands in 2015 under a single global campaign, Taste the Feeling. And it celebrates the idea that drinking a Coke, any Coke, and they've got 4 now, 4 main Cokes, is a simple pleasure that makes everyday moments more special. And all their social media is configured around that. The online strategy is to link the beverage and the brand to personal, shareable moments, intimate moments, falling in love, winning the match, being sad. They haven't gone to funerals yet, but it ain't a long way off. They're really trying to insert us in that life. They launched this very big campaign in South Africa earlier this year, Gift the Feeling, enabling fans to personalize Coca-Cola created gifts, short video loops, to communicate their moods. And there are all sorts of examples that you can look at where they gave people these opportunities to do that. They now have more than 100 million people who have liked them around the world on Facebook. They are very, very big on Facebook. It's a collection of stories from around the world have helped Coke make it into what it is today. These shareable moments, they invite you to these shareable moments and to take ownership of the brand. So again, if we have these larger debates about structure and agency, the whole idea about social media is to give you a sense of agency, to give you a sense that this is empowering to you. And it is. There's no doubt that social media is enormously empowering. But it's empowering you, in a sense, to be more vulnerable to the various suggestions and the very sophisticated, algorithmically driven behavioral economics behind this. Their Facebook page in South Africa, they have one for every country, enormous amounts of following and very clever and interesting things they do on it. We'll look at that at the moment. I won't speak too much about this, but it's absolutely fascinating to unpack just some of the basic ways in which the algorithms work. You might be wondering how you see the things you see when you're on Twitter. It's a fascinating science. Very, very basically, it's who made it, how other people have liked it. These are your friends. If your other friends have liked it, you're more likely to see it. Types of posts, they up photographs and videos and more, and how new it is. Those are just the basic four, but this is at the bottom. This is a simplified equation. Facebook also looks at roughly 100,000 other personalized factors in their algorithms to decide what you see. And what they do with the advertising is equally as sophisticated. So when Coca-Cola says they want to particularly target, or Red Bull, particularly target young men 18 to 24 who are attending tertiary institutions, Facebook says done. And where would you like those people to be? And you say, well, how about the Eastern Cape? And they say, fine, let's do the Eastern Cape. But we're having a road show next week where the Red Bull truck is coming to Rhodes campus. Can you target students just at Rhodes campus? They can do all of that. And then only those students at Rhodes campus will see those ads. And you don't know because it's your personal Facebook feed. You're not aware of the fact that everyone else has seen it in their own particular combination of all these other kind of complicated algorithms. It's quite astonishing how well Coke has taken to Instagram. Instagram is a wonderful social media. It's so immediate. It's so addictive. It's very visual. It's very much about sharing these moments. And they encourage you to do so with incentives and competitions and ways of participating. And just to talk very briefly about the popularity of Instagram, very mobile orientated, much more mobile orientated than Facebook, very visual, very different, and the functionality, that ability to post photos and get likes, as I say, younger people than the people in this room, it's the fastest growing of the current, that and Snapchat, which is also a very visual medium, are the two fastest growing social medias. And this is a slide that I've shared before, but I just wanted to show it's not for Africa, but it's just the most amazing illustration of the intimacy. This was all this Coca-Cola, there's a mother. It's this mother's promotion aimed at, if this is from Coke's own things, how do we involve mothers to convince them to purchase more family-sized Cokes for their family? What do we do? Here's our solution. We really researched it. This is in South America. And they went for social media and cell phones, and the results, they were absolutely thrilled with the results, as you can see there. That they got enormous 13 million people participating in the social media campaign aimed at getting mothers to give their kids more Coke. There's that lovely paper, it's 2007 paper that you might be familiar with. I've got a reference to it here about mothers in Soweto in South Africa. And already then, that's in the pre-social media age, a very significant proportion of under fours, part of their beverage mix was a really sugary sweetened beverage, because obviously it's energy. And again, in moderation, if you're going to have a little bit of Coke, we were talking earlier, Coke's great medicine when you've got jipper guts. Okay, so it can have its place. Red Bull, wow! I've just read an article yesterday which blew my mind. Slight evidence, very correlative, but that it really helps tired eyes, so-called computer eyes. There's something in taurine that seems to make your eyes. It doesn't just give you that massive caffeine list with the 80 milligrams of caffeine and the 12, 14 spoons of sugar. But it's also got those other ingredients that give Red Bull its wings, and taurine is the main one. And there seems to be a link, taurine and tired eye. So there's not it's not like this stuff doesn't work. Of course it works. It gives us the lift. It gives us the boost. I can't preach, we shouldn't be drinking Red Bull and Coke when I do 6 espressos a day, and that's on a quiet day. Sometimes it's 8 or 9. So caffeine addiction is a wide thing, but when one's trying to specifically target mothers and families, it's quite extraordinary. Coke also uses celebrities a great deal, and this whole notion of the celebrity endorsement. And Coke and Red Bull, you'll see, are focused on 3 particular areas, and they're all the obvious areas. They're sport, they're music, and they are recreational lifestyles, partying. And the Selena Gomez, just needed to say, when they partied with Selena, Share a Coke, Share a Song campaign, it's still to this day, 70 tracks from different artists. It's so far the all-time record for likes on Instagram. It's the most amazing campaign, and it's now being used as case studies, again at Harvard Business School and all sorts of other places where people are looking at these case studies. Selena has just, as you know, very sadly had a kidney transplant, which has got absolutely, I'm sure, nothing to do with the fact that she's the spokesperson for Coca-Cola. It wasn't a liver transplant. She had lupus, and she's been very out about it and very brave about it just in the last few weeks, and her best friend donated a kidney. So it's a heck of a story, but she is absolutely huge as an influencer. So I'm not going to say anything about her health being related to her consumption habits. She probably lives very, very healthily. But that's the new Coke range, and you can see how they're marketing those 4. The original taste, life, zero sugar, and light globally. So they really are starting to push their own products a lot more with the light, because people are starting to become anti-sugar. But what they do online, and this is where it gets to the intimacy and inserting yourself in the story, the kind of analytical lenses that we're trying to frame it with, is they're very explicit. Let's do the story. Like if you agree that those two go better together. This is a typical South African meal, a quarter, and like, share, it's fun, you get involved. It's interesting that you've got that high-calorie quarter with a Coke Zero. I mean, it's like, I always thought the weirdest, most ironic thing in the world. I saw an American restaurant about 20 years ago, Diet Coke float. I mean, what? Why, So, but I didn't have it. Our recording studio is always pumping with raw talent and musical masterminds. Coke really invests significantly in music, and it's people in music, like Selena Gomez, are big influencers. Again, on Instagram, you can see some of the things. Which of these delicious meals do you feel like pairing with an ice-cold Coke Zero sugar for dinner tonight? Again, that's the low sugar version, but they do it with the high. And you participate, you share, you answer, you win prizes sometimes. You can have a look there. This is just specifically how they are inviting that engagement and that sharing. So potential Coke consumers partake, even drive campaigns by commenting, sharing, adding hashtags to their own content, and incorporating Coke into their everyday life. According to Coca-Cola, and this is an astonishing statistic, up to 85% of all the social content about their brand is generated by us. We doing that work. They just spark it. They just start it off, and we get involved. Through the social media, Coca-Cola, which is that iconic pop brand, through social media, they said, you can be part of the brand too. It's not ours anymore. Why don't you come and be part of what it means to be part of Coke? And it's, as you can see, it's ranked 4th most valuable brand. But it's about that participation. And it's about the genius who came up with the way that you put that participation best together. And there's a good reason why over 85% of new digital revenues last year went to just 2 companies, Google and Facebook. And as Mark Zuckerberg, 33 years old, one of the 10 richest people in the world, says, people influence people. Nothing influences you more than a recommendation from a trusted friend. The best broadcast message, a trusted referral, is the holy grail of advertising. So if a friend of yours likes Coke and retweets that thing with Selena Gomez, 4 million likes, it just is. It's our friends. And we imitate. Behavioral psychology is a lot about imitate. We want to do what our friends are doing. And we do what our friends are doing. And our friends are increasingly drinking Red Bull and Coke if we are a particular demographic. So just looking very briefly, I won't go into this, saying that Coca-Cola's Facebook is not just an advertising product, it's also in the surveillance product. It says here, Facebook knows more about you than the most oppressive governments imaginable. I was going through with my class last week just what Facebook and Google do know about you. It is shattering. It's just unbelievable. They know where you've been for the last month. You can put it up, Google in particular. And it's got a map, and it shows all the journeys you've taken, because on your phones it's all geolocated. So if you use Google or Facebook, they know where you are, who you've seen, what choices, much more so than laptops. So just this UR product. Just a very brief, I know we've got to end because I want to give some time for questions. There's a wonderful bit of anthropological research. Anthropologists are doing the best thinking about social media, because social media is so getting into our lives and changing our social structures and reconnecting people in some ways and breaking people up in other ways. It's become a subject of anthropology, and some of the best anthropology has been done by Danny Miller and people at the University College London, ICL, and they developed this notion of scalable sociality, which we're only starting to discover. This is all new, 2015. They did this big project called How the World Changed Social Media. Not how social media changed the world, how the world changed social media. It's about a key concept in our field, media studies, which is domestication. And it basically says we, the people, we adapt and adopt. We adopt and we adapt and we modify equals domesticate technology to our use. And it looks at how different people use different technologies in the same city, in different countries. They did it in 9 different countries. And they said that basically what's so powerful about it is that it gives you a great deal of power. You can choose from the most private to the most public. You can go on those Facebook settings and you can decide who sees your post. It can be everybody. It can be school friends, close friends. You all know how to do that. Same with Instagram, etc. Or you can go from a very small group. You can be on a WhatsApp group of 4 or 5. We've got a JMS3 WhatsApp group. My master's students have a WhatsApp group. My PhD students have a WhatsApp group. Right through to these massive groups where I've got 2 people in JMS3 that have more than 5,000 followers on Facebook. And that's the limit on Facebook. You know, and that's much bigger than the Dunbar's number of 150, which is the largest amount of people we can actually know. Know as in know their name, recognize their face, and maybe kind of know some context about them. So this idea of scalability is what's so fascinating, is that we feel very empowered when we're on Facebook and Twitter. And it goes back to that intimacy, that authenticity, and that engagement. So just very briefly looking at Red Bull, you can look at it later, but these are seriously sugary drinks. You drink enough Red Bull, you will induce some serious physiological changes in your body. You can see in terms of Facebook, Red Bull, what I was saying earlier, way above everybody else, beating out, these figures are a little bit old, but even now, they are the pioneers in social media. They focus on 3 areas very particularly, very, very hard on enjoyment and entertainment. So parties and music are very much their big thing. They have their own in-house media, social media thing, which they established way back in 2007, which is the year the iPhone came out and started the smartphone revolution. They spend 33% of their income on marketing. You know, when you're creating a product that only has about 60, 70 American cents worth of ingredients in, 60 or 70 South African cents of ingredients in, and you're selling it for 20 rand, you've got a lot of money to spend on marketing. And that's been Coke's thing from day one. Take something that costs 10 cents to make and sell it for $1 and use a lot of the other 90 cents to make you want it. So there are products that we don't want and don't need that are sold at relatively high price points, so that money can go into social media marketing to make us. It's a wonderful loop. It's a wonderful vicious or virtuous circle, depending on whether you invested in them. You can see just how what a good investment Red Bull has been for investors. They've got 26 teams around the world, soccer teams all over the place. They're very famous for sponsoring Formula One. Who's their current driver? Anybody know? The Red Bull driver? No, Formula One. Van Stappen, I think it is. Is that? Yeah, that's right. He's the new Red Bull guy. Yeah, thank you. So there's usually one person that knows. Thank you. And they also they go for extreme sports, but they also always Brad Binder. They're not so extreme. I mean, he's the South African MotoGP guy. Ultra running, very much like Coke, who's an Olympic sponsor, associating with athleticism and sports, but also with people like Geordie Smith. There's a competition that a while ago Geordie Smith and a Red Bull go together like, and you complete the sentence and share that and win some. A lot of money into music and African culture, and they really push that very, very hard. They're trying to get in, especially on our campuses. They're working hard. UKZN, Forte, Rhodes, all over the show with music. The Red Bull Music Academy, I could speak a great deal about, but Yeah, they do a lot of good, and if you're into hip-hop and music, this is one way to advance your career. This very famous campaign of theirs, the most successful social media campaign last year, which was basically the highest ever parachute drop. It's the Solaris campaign. Red Bull gives you wings. And you can see how they associate themselves with sport. We're looking at the university's perfect setting for that. We're looking about caffeine consumption. Students love their caffeine. And there's a variety of things that we can look at just why they're targeting right throughout the world that 18 to 24 demographic. That's really where they're going hard. Slightly younger in some countries, slightly older in other countries. Hypermasculinity, a whole different area, but Red Bull are going into it a great deal. Again, it draws on stuff that we're more familiar with social sciences. These are just 3 recent studies that are so fascinating and interesting about the hypermasculinity. And it all comes together in this Red Bull Bulletin, which is an old media printed magazine with more than a 2 million print run around the world. It's available in South Africa. And you can see just what they mean by this hypermasculinity and how Red Bull plays in it. Men are the primary market for Red Bull. Coke is much more family orientated, and their social media are orientated. Red Bull, big sponsorship, costs them hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And you've got to ask yourself the question, this is all so evocative. Who else focused on music, sport, motor racing, and masculinity? Where have we seen this before? Big time. We've seen it in the cigarette companies. Exact same thing, motor racing. It was the biggest thing. Who remembers Men Rate Gunston Grape? None of you, but you can ask your parents. Some of us here are able to. You know, these are what we grew up with. This was the sugar of our day, and we all smoked. And some of us are not here to tell the tale. And again, associating with music. Red Bull and Coke are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in Africa associating with hip-hop culture, young people's culture, etc., just like the cigarette companies do. They have hypermasculinity, but they also have a very specific strategy, Red Bull and Coke, for women, which I won't go into, where they're also taking a lot of memes and thinking around "You've come a long way, baby," the famous slogan from Virginia Slims, and how they got women involved in smoking, because women never used to smoke, and in many countries don't anymore. It's got absolutely nothing to do with Coke or Red Bull. I just thought it was the most amazing ad, and I was trying to find the Red Bull one. Blow smoke in her face and she'll follow you anywhere. So it just shows how far one has come. So marketing the age of social media, the key kind of takeaways that we're kind of looking at in this is just how it works, how that intimacy, that engagement, that participatory nature, how they get you to insert yourself into the narrative, how we can use some of our analytical lenses of narrative theory, how we can use some of our thinking around representativity, identity, and how they try and get one to identify. There's a variety of ways of cutting it up and thinking about it. We could go into this a little bit later. But when I did the ISMINPA presentation, the keynote last year, the main thing I focused on there was, well, what can we learn from these guys? I'm not going to draw that out now, but you can see that if we want to make any kind of headway with public health, if you want people to drink more water, or can you imagine a social media campaign to increase the consumption of fruit and vegetables? These are the guys we have to learn from. They're driven by powerful profit motives, but they're getting people involved in the stories. So maybe we've got to start sharing on Instagram about, bunches of carrots. I don't know. We've got to start thinking out of the box, because our fruit and veg consumption, as you know, is not going up. We need to get that up. We need people to drink more bottled water, so we need to think about that. Just to end off, South Africa, again, digital divide. We don't want to be immune to the political economy of this unequal place. A lot of South Africans go hungry. A lot of South Africans don't have a cell phone. They don't have data. So we still have that bifurcated society where we have the problems of malnutrition in 2 components. There's overnutrition and undernutrition. And both of them are equally in their own way deadly. The most astonishing thing about undernutrition, especially at a young age, is that it leads to obesity in a later age. So stunting, as you guys know, causes physiological changes in the body. So a lot of people who are undernourished up to the age of 5 are later very prone to obesity. And that's a peculiar problem. We've seen it now in Mexico, the most obese nation on earth. We've seen it very powerfully in Brazil, which is Coke's second biggest target market, and we're now seeing it in South Africa. So I'll take a few questions. Sorry I had to rush through that a little bit. We have about 10 minutes, so we can throw it open. Just thought I'd share ideas with you. What do you think? Are you on social media? Do you love Red Bull? Are you going to give Red Bull up? Do you feel like I'm in Red Bull now? Because that's the one thing with the subliminal thing. You start seeing the stuff, and wow, a Coke right now would sure feel good. Yes?
The sugar-free and with both Red Bull and Coke, what are those health implications?
So this is a complicated area. I anticipated your question, so I've got a slide. And this is their new product, which is stevia sweetened and cane sugar sweetened, not using the corn syrup and not using some of the aspartame-based sugars. So they are now pushing this very big. There are health risks associated with those diet sodas. And there are also obesity risks associated. People think that, they cause a psychological reaction. So there are a lot of double-blind control studies that show that people who use diet drinks as part of a weight control program don't get very far with that. Plus you've got your problems with aspartame, etc. So stevia and sugar water, they are adapting. Coke has over 3,000 brands globally. They're big into waters, they're big into energy drinks. They own 20% of Monster, which is Red Bull's big competitor. So they really are diversifying because they know in the days of sugar, just like the days of tobacco, sugar is going to increasingly be shunned by people who don't want to die young. Yes?
Henry, if we look at something like physical activity and getting people to be more physically active, it's
Yes.
not really a product that we're selling, whereas all of these campaigns are very product specific.
Right.
How do you think we can overcome that and use the tools from what they've done to get people to be more physically active?
I think that's a wonderful question, precisely because one's talking about a lifestyle. But so are they in a way. They're talking about a particular kind of lifestyle, which is why they keep on wanting to associate themselves with physical activity. So Coke, Pine have been sponsoring the Olympics since the 50s to associate with athleticism, which is a physical movement. Red Bull very much, with the ultra runners and the football teams, etc. So in a sense, again, all of that is good, and having an Energade or a Gatorade or Miracle, even a Red Bull after your soccer match, it's fine when you're a physically active specimen of humanity and you are working out your 3 or 5 days. Not great, but it's better. But most of us aren't. So more people are participating in FIFA 16 online than are actually out on the streets playing soccer. So we're all moving to games. We're all moving to the sedentary world. We all admire these racing drivers and these football players. But we are becoming, as you guys know, and you guys study this hard, more sedentary by the year in most nations with urbanization, mass transportation, etc. Coke and Red Bull, Coke in particular, are sponsoring worldwide scientific endeavors to show that obesity is caused from physical inactivity. Not our product. Don't look here. We're not to blame. This is all about, if people would just move, they could drink as much Coke and Red Bull as they want. We didn't cause this, so that's also part of what we're up against in terms of your equation. But to just have a quick go at answering that question, I do believe that one can not just use scare tactics, which is the most of our public health campaigns around the world. It shows diabetics having their foot amputated. Even the South African ad, one of them is like that. It certainly gets your attention, and we know that scare tactics can work. But one's got to associate people with a more, especially young people who think they're bulletproof, with a longer term. It's hard to get out of these habits in your 30s and 40s. It's hard to give up smoking. It's very hard to give up Red Bull, Coke, and caffeine, and all those kind of things. So it's about, I think, creating on social media ways of participating in healthier communities that don't shun these things, because you don't want to be prescriptive. You don't want to say, don't drink Red Bull, don't drink Coke, because that's not going to play with anyone under 35. It's not going to play with anybody. So you need to, I suppose, locate it in a way that people make much healthier choices. So it's about getting back to choice set theory. When you're thinking about a particular day, have a Red Bull, go for a run. You want people to think about the possibility of not having the Red Bull, having the water. But it's the best question out there, is how do we promote those process lifestyles as opposed to just a sale of a product? Because that's all these guys have to do. We've got to take care of the whole life course. Yes.
It seems to me, from what you've been saying, that the underlying assumption is you need to get people to believe a particular narrative.
Yes.
You need to convince them that the story leads to something that they actually want as opposed to what they currently think they want.
Yes.
So the crux of that would be then, how do you get someone to believe your story such that they make healthier choices?
You put it beautifully. That's exactly right. So how would you suggest we do that? What's attractive about a healthy lifestyle story, or what's unattractive about a healthy life? I mean, a healthy lifestyle is a very attractive story, so why are most of us not leading them?
Exactly. Why don't we believe that that story will give us what we actually want?
And much more effectively than Coke and Red Bull. You know, when you drink a Red Bull, you feel young, you feel hip, you feel funky. You know, if I want to relate to my students, especially on our ridiculous Friday afternoon 2 until 4 double for JMS 3, I bring a Red Bull, a sugar-free one, but it gets me through the session. And I suppose in my narrative it's, you know, they can see that I'm not this old fuddy-duddy. So you feel young, you feel alive, you feel like, you know, I mean, these images that they associate us with, I mean, that was just such a beautiful image, this one here. You know, that's what they're giving you. But they're not. So yeah, you're right. We've got to associate our, I suppose if you're dancing all night for 6 or 7 hours and you only drinking Red Bull, it's a bit of a workout. I don't know. It's convoluted. But you've hit the nail on the head. It's about how do we associate and allow people to enter the narratives of less sedentary, more fruit and veg, less sugar sweetened beverages. And particularly how do we do that for developing countries where what they're doing in Brazil with that Mothers campaign is just extraordinary. And you look, there's a documentary on the New York Times last week. Go and look at it. It's a New York Times article, but they're using some of the best modern journalism tools. As you scroll down the article, video just plays automatically, but very discreetly. They use SoundCloud, so some of the slides are animated. It's a wonderful article about obesity in Brazil and its relationship. And we think we've got problems. Mexico and Brazil, their diabetes rates are just soaring. Anthea?
No, I was going to say, I think part of the trick is this thing.
Yes.
Because, you know, I share a car, so I can't always, you know, get where I want to go via car, so I have to walk. Then this thing tells me, you know, I just go to walk, I need to get there for an appointment. Then it says to me, you've done 22 minutes of walking, you know, good job. So, you know, and then I started.
That's a wonderful way in. There are all these fitness apps, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's completely private.
Yes.
You know, so I'm not necessarily sharing that with a whole bunch of other people.
But you could.
But what it is doing is
Yeah.
it's tracking some things for me. So then, you know, then I don't choose to walk. So then I feel like I'm letting this thing down that I'm having a relationship with. So,
absolutely.
so
That's such
it's
a good
that
example.
kind of
Yeah.
insidious thing
Yeah.
of being a little bit like my mother, but not my mother. So, you know, it's not going to nag me. But it does start to make me feel. Then it gives me a weekly summary. And I go, oh my gosh, that 22 minutes is all I ever did in the entire week. I really should be doing, you know, so I think this is part of the trick.
Yeah.
You know, is to kind of, you know, get that thing to feel completely intimate and personal to my life and to help me, not nag me or boss me, you know. So,
I think
but
that's
then also it's
so
kind
useful,
of
yeah.
within a small circle, and I can, you know.
But
I'm
you
not
can,
putting
because of
myself into
scalable
the world.
sociality, you can choose the size
Yes.
of that circle.
You
So
absolutely can.
we talked about it a lot at Spinpa the year before last, and that's a wonderful, wonderful conference. Because there were a lot of people looking at fitness apps. So fitness apps are the most popular apps on all smartphones. They're more popular than anything else. And a lot of their popularity of some of them is precisely their scalable sociality. A lot of people do what Anthea is doing, but then they share it with all their friends. And we know from double-blind controlled gold standard studies that if you share your commitment to doing the park run on Saturday and then you share your time on your social media, you will do it more often than people who don't share. So that sharing and that ability to participate in the narrative that your apps give you, people share their routes. I mean, I've had to block people on Facebook because I don't actually want to know the route they ran around. You know, it's a friend of mine in Brooklyn. It was interesting for the first month, but you know, now I don't do it. But I suppose if I wanted to, you can, and you can get into that, and you can all share routes and times, and that's with walking, running. It can be gym workouts, can be games of tennis, can be rounds of golf. So I think there's an app for that. To a short answer also to your question is, how do we take these guys on? We have to make that narrative more exciting, but we also have to try and get this, the voice in our head, the behavioral psychologist in our head, what Anthea called the voice of a mother or father, that kind of slightly hectoring but also encouraging voice. There's an app for that. Yes?
I think another problem with selling a healthy lifestyle is it's expensive.
Yes, it is.
Or I have people on
It
Instagram
can be expensive,
that
yeah.
I follow,
Yeah.
and people that go to the gym often, that post their workouts,
Mm.
that post the food they eat,
Mm.
and everything they buy just seems a lot more expensive than a bottle of Coke or Red Bull.
Absolutely.
So
And we can't forget
it's,
that.
yeah, perhaps find means to make it seem like living a healthier life is a cheap alternative.
You're 100% correct, and that's why I made the point about the political economy of South Africa, this incredible income disparity. I've seen the new stuff from the Statistician General a month ago about how many more South Africans have fallen under the poverty line in the last 5 years. This country is technically in a recession, certainly 7 of the 9 provinces are. And it can be expensive, and I think we looked a lot at that with the Healthy Active Kids report card. What does it take it's a very, sugar sweetened beverages are a very cheap form of energy. And I'm talking about Coke and Red Bull. Coke and Red Bull are the top end. Coke bought Sparletta 2 years ago, I don't know if you know this, and now makes Sparletta at about 3 or 4 rand per 2 litre, cheaper than Coke, just so it can also own that market segment. Just as much sugar. Their main business is still the high margin business of Coca-Cola. And then we have, uniquely in South Africa, we've got another paper on this, on the sugar sweetened beverage environment, what we call ecosystem in South Africa. And there's Twizzler, which is entirely locally grown. It's an Eastern Cape success story because it's here, it's built here. And Twizzler has just, the last 10 years, been growing like Topsy, and that's even cheaper than Sparletta. So you've got those different brands, and it is, for poor families, it's a very easy, quick source of nutrition. A bit of Coke, it gives you energy, and we do need some sugar. So we're just saying, what's the recommended daily allowance? This new Soweto paper that we quote in the Healthy Active Kids report card, the 2016 Healthy Active Kids report card that a whole team of us worked on, that shows that the average 12 to 15-year-old girl in Soweto was consuming, it was 8 to 10 beverages per week. That's 8 to 10 cans. That's 10 to 12. So, and that's what's pushing up those kind of rates. So water is a lot cheaper. So I'm just saying on the sugary drink side. On the food side, I think you're completely right. It's a much harder thing. Vegetables don't keep, sparsas don't often stock vegetables because they don't have the fridges and refrigeration. But if we can just get people to cut down on their sugar-sweetened beverages, we'll do a lot, even if we can't alter some of the other parameters. Time for maybe one more question.
What concerns me is you said 54% of South Africans have
Yes.
smartphones.
Yes,
Is that
about
smart?
half. Yeah.
Okay, but they might have other phones.
Yes.
So the smartphones have the apps on the social media.
They are internet connected and they're
Yeah.
app enabled. Yes. Yeah.
So if these companies are targeting the poorer populations
Yeah.
who don't have access to smartphones and social media, our ability to change behavior through smartphones becomes...
So Twizzler and Sparletta and some of the cheap Chinese imports that we are faced with in the sugar sweetened beverage, the broader environment, that's absolutely true. The higher end, which is your Coke range, your Fantas, your Sprites, your 6 varieties of Red Bull, which includes a sugar-free variety, all of those are very much, a Red Bull is expensive. So people who buy Red Bulls tend to have smartphones. There's a very high correlation. No one's done that exercise. We'd love to do that exercise. Part of what we're not doing, which we'd love to do, and this might be a funding proposal that we could look at some point, is we're not doing much by way of reception studies with real people. As I said, most of what we've been doing at the moment, my research assistant Andrea is here, she's been doing a lot of this work with me and for me, is we're looking at what they're doing. We're just doing look, see, describe. Because it's completely fascinating, I hope you find, just to look, see, describe, just to see how clever these campaigns are. Just go and, I'd encourage all of you to friend or to like Coke, to like Red Bull, to like McDonald's, and to like Kentucky on your Facebook, on your Instagram. Get their propaganda sent to you, and you will be amazed at its sophistication. And every now and then you'll get an idea and you'll say, hey, we should do this for public health. And that's ultimately why we're doing this research. We're doing this research to see what these guys are up to, but we're also doing it to learn what's the best practice in behavior modification. And the guys who are at the cutting edge of best practice in behavior modification are these big multinational food companies. There was a hand in the back, but we can close on. Okay. Well, thank you very much. That was a lot of fun. Thank you. And out.
Okay, first, just before everyone leaves, I just want to thank Carrie on behalf of ISPA and the Department of Human Phonetics and Ergonomics. We certainly need to have you more in the department and to work more closely with you. But we are going to have a meeting now about some collaborative work that we're looking at. So we look forward to working with you guys closely.
Thanks, and thanks all for coming. It's really been fun. Thank you. There are papers coming.